I was 26 years old when this happened, and at the time I worked as a supervisor at a cosmetic store inside a mall in Arlington, Texas. I used to close the store 2 or 3 times a week, which meant leaving after 10:30 p.m. The parking lot at that hour was almost empty, especially during the week. I lived alone in an apartment about 20 minutes away, and always used a rideshare app to get home. I had been doing that for years, so it was automatic for me. That particular night I was especially tired. It had been a busy day, my feet were sore, and I just wanted to get home. I requested the ride while still inside the mall, as I was turning off the last lights in the store. The app showed that a driver had accepted and was 9 minutes away. I grabbed my bag, double-checked the name and license plate on my phone, as I always do, and walked to the main entrance. The air outside was hot and heavy, typical of a Texas summer, even though it was almost 11 at night. When I stepped onto the sidewalk, the parking lot was practically empty. There were only a few cars scattered around and some tall lights illuminating the asphalt. I stood near the pickup zone watching the map on my phone. The assigned car still appeared to be a few blocks away. I was focused on the route when a silver sedan turned toward me and pulled up right in front of the entrance, exactly where I was waiting. My first reflex was to look at the app to see if it had updated to, "Your driver has arrived," but nothing appeared. The car stayed there with the engine running. My heart sped up a little, but I still tried to think it might be a coincidence. Then the driver's window began to roll down slowly. The man behind the wheel looked directly at me and said my full name without hesitation. It wasn't in the form of a question. He stated it, as if he was absolutely certain. I felt an immediate knot in my stomach. Normally drivers ask, "Are you so-and-so?" but he didn't ask. He said, "Amanda, right? I'm your driver." His voice was low, controlled, unhurried. I looked again at the app. The driver shown on the screen had a different name and was still 3 minutes away. The license plate displayed in the app also didn't match the one on that car. Even so, the vehicle model was identical to the one shown in the app. That confused me for a second. I stepped a little closer, just enough to visually confirm the plate while keeping a safe distance. I said I was waiting for a specific car and mentioned the name shown in the app. He shook his head quickly and said the system was glitching in that area, that sometimes it took a while to update, but that he had already accepted the ride. He said he could take me anyway, and that the app would adjust later. The way he said it sounded rehearsed, like he had said that before. I noticed he avoided looking at my phone whenever I lifted it to show him. My heart started beating faster. The parking lot was too quiet. No one was walking nearby at that moment. I took a step back and said I preferred to wait for confirmation in the app. He insisted, saying I didn't need to cancel anything, that he was there to pick me up and that it didn't make sense to wait any longer. His tone remained calm, but there was something forced about the way he smiled. The smile didn't match his eyes. He kept his hands on the steering wheel, but his body was slightly leaning toward me. I checked my phone again. The real driver was still on the map, approaching from the other entrance of the parking lot. This wasn't a system delay, it was a completely different person. I noticed another detail. The interior of the car seemed too dark even with the dashboard light on. There was no official rideshare sticker on the windshield, something almost all drivers in the area used. I asked his name again. He gave me a different name from the one in the app. When I pointed that out, he said he had recently switched accounts. Nothing he said really lined up. My skin prickled at that moment. I had a very clear feeling that if I opened that door and got in, I would be making a huge mistake. I said I needed to check something in the app and took a few more steps back, almost pressing against the glass doors of the mall. He turned the car off for a second, then started it again, as if deciding whether to keep insisting. He stayed there, staring at me, not driving away. The silence of the parking lot seemed to amplify the tension. I could hear my own blood pulsing in my ears. At that moment, my phone vibrated, showing that the real driver was less than a minute away, approaching from the opposite side of the building. I raised my phone visibly and said my driver was already arriving. The man in the silver sedan quickly glanced toward the other side of the parking lot, then looked back at me. The smile had disappeared. He didn't argue anymore. He just sat there for a few seconds as if waiting for me to change my mind. I felt real fear at that moment, because he didn't look frustrated like someone who had mistakenly lost a ride. He looked like he was evaluating something else. I turned my back and went back inside the mall, pretending I had forgotten something. As soon as the automatic doors closed behind me, I took my first deep breath since he had pulled up. I moved away from the main entrance and stood behind one of the interior columns, from where I could still see part of the parking lot without being easily seen. My heart was still racing. The silver sedan remained parked in exactly the same spot. He didn't leave immediately, didn't honk, didn't show irritation. He just sat there with the engine running. I watched for almost a full minute. No other passenger approached the car. He clearly wasn't waiting for someone else. A chill ran down my spine when I realized he was probably waiting for me to come back out alone. The app confirmed that the real driver had arrived, but at the side entrance of the mall, not the main one. I decided I wasn't going out the front at all. I walked through the interior corridor to the other exit, keeping my phone in my hand and constantly looking back. When I stepped out the side, I saw the correct car with the exact plate and name shown in the app. I checked 3 times before getting in. As soon as the car started moving, I instinctively looked out the rear window. When the car turned onto the main road in front of the mall, I looked across the avenue and saw the same silver sedan parked under a tree, a few meters away from the main entrance. Its headlights were off, but I could clearly see the outline of the vehicle. The driver was sitting inside, motionless, looking toward the mall entrance. He didn't look like someone who had left to search for another ride. He looked like he was watching. My stomach dropped. If I had walked out the front again, he might still have been there waiting. During the ride to my apartment, I told the real driver everything. He became serious immediately and said that wasn't uncommon, that some people tried to pose as drivers in large parking lots to pick up distracted passengers. When I got home, I went inside quickly and locked the door behind me. Still shaking a little, I opened the app and contacted support, reporting the car model, the time, and what had happened. Hours later, I received an official response confirming that no vehicle with that license plate or that model had been registered as active in that area at that time. The driver assigned to me had never been at the main entrance at that moment. What still unsettles me to this day isn't just the fact that he pulled up before the confirmation in the app. It's that he knew my full name and said it with certainty, as if he was sure I was the right person. I didn't wear a visible name tag outside the store, and my name wasn't on my bag or clothes. He didn't ask, he stated it. I will never know how he had access to that information, but I know that if I had ignored that detail in the app and gotten into that car out of exhaustion or impatience, maybe no one would have realized the mistake in time. Story 2. I was 21 years old when this happened, and I was in my second year of college in a small town in North Carolina called Boone. I lived in a shared apartment near campus, but I preferred working out at a 24-hour gym about 10 minutes away by car. I always chose to go late at night after 10:30 p.m. because the place was practically empty and I didn't like waiting for equipment. I had been following that routine for months, so I felt relatively safe there. The gym was simple, with black rubber flooring, large mirrors, and strong white lighting that made everything very bright. The women's locker room was at the back, separated by a narrow hallway. That night I arrived around 11:15 p.m. There were only 2 cars in the parking lot besides mine. When I walked in, I noticed there was only one man working out in the free weights area. He looked to be in his early 30s, wearing a dark t-shirt and headphones. At first, I didn't think anything of it. I went to the treadmill and started my warm-up, as I always did. After a few minutes, I noticed he wasn't using the equipment continuously. He would do a short set, stop, walk around the space, and look in my direction through the mirror's reflection. I tried to ignore it. I thought maybe I was imagining things. I switched from the treadmill to the leg machines and realized he also changed areas almost at the same time. Not exactly close to me, but close enough to remain in my line of sight through the mirror. I started paying attention to the pattern. Every time I changed equipment, a few minutes later he would change too, as if he were circling the space without a defined workout. He didn't seem focused on anything specific. What bothered me most was that whenever I looked directly at him, he would look away too quickly. It wasn't casual. It was the automatic movement of someone who had been caught staring. I tried to rationalize it. Maybe he was waiting for someone. Maybe he was intentionally alternating exercises. But my attention was no longer on my workout. I started watching the clock on the wall. He also seemed to glance at the clock frequently. At one point when I went to the water fountain, I noticed he had stopped completely and was leaning against one of the machines, not using his phone, just looking toward the hallway that led to the locker rooms. That gave me a real discomfort in my chest. I was already sweating from the workout, but I felt a chill down my back that had nothing to do with physical effort. I decided to finish my workout earlier than planned. I didn't want to seem paranoid, but the feeling of being watched was too strong to ignore. I grabbed my water bottle and towel and walked toward the hallway that led to the locker rooms. Before turning the corner, I looked at his reflection in the mirror behind me. He was standing still, looking in my direction. He didn't smile. He didn't gesture. He just stood there as if evaluating. My heart started beating faster. I entered the women's locker room and closed the main door behind me. That's when I noticed a detail I had never paid attention to before. The locker room door wasn't locking properly. There was a simple internal latch, but when I turned it, I felt it didn't fully engage. I tested it by gently pulling the handle. The door moved a few millimeters, even with the latch in place. My stomach tightened immediately. I had used that locker room dozens of times and had never noticed it. The space was small, with 3 changing stalls and 2 showers in the back. I was alone in there. I thought about going back out to the main area and telling the staff at the front desk, but I remembered that at that hour, there was no one at the counter. The gym operated in automatic mode after 10 p.m., with keycard access. I took a deep breath and tried to stay calm. Maybe the door was just misaligned. Maybe I was overreacting because of the discomfort I felt about the man outside. Still, I tested the latch one more time. I turned it firmly and pushed the door to make sure it was closed. It seemed secure enough, but not completely solid. I started changing as quickly as possible. I took off my sweaty shirt and reached for my clean blouse in my bag. The silence in the locker room was absolute. No shower running, no loud ventilation, just the faint echo of my own movements. I was pulling on my pants when I heard something that made my entire body freeze. The sound of the handle turning from the outside. It wasn't a quick test, it was slow, deliberate, as if someone were feeling the resistance of the latch. I felt my heart pounding so hard it seemed to echo off the walls of the locker room. The handle turned to its limit and slowly returned. I stood completely still for a second, trying to decide if I had heard correctly. Maybe someone had tried by mistake. Maybe they had entered the wrong hallway. But a few seconds later, the handle turned again. Even more slowly, the door pushed lightly against the latch, making a low click. It wasn't strong enough to open, but someone was clearly applying pressure from the other side. I moved quickly and pressed my entire body against the door, using my shoulder and back to hold it shut. My hands were shaking. I hadn't even finished getting dressed, but at that moment the only thing that mattered was keeping that door closed. The handle continued to be tested for several seconds that felt like minutes. There were no knocks, no voice apologizing. Just that controlled movement, as if the person were assessing how much effort it would take to force it open. I felt the pressure increase once, as if he had pushed harder, and then it stopped abruptly. I remained pressed against the door with all my body weight, even after the pressure had ceased. My breathing was uneven, and I tried to make as little noise as possible so he wouldn't know I was holding it. The silence on the other side was almost worse than the attempt to open it. I didn't hear immediate footsteps walking away. I didn't hear a voice, just silence. I stood there mentally counting seconds, waiting for any movement. After a while, I don't know if it was 30 seconds or 2 minutes, I heard slow footsteps in the hallway. They weren't hurried. They were controlled, as if the person were walking normally, trying not to draw attention. Only after I heard the main gym door open and close in the distance did I finally breathe a little easier. Even then, I didn't step away from the door immediately. I waited a few more minutes before moving. My legs were trembling. I finished getting dressed quickly, grabbed my bag, and stood staring at the locker room door, trying to decide how to leave without seeming vulnerable. I carefully unlocked it and opened it just a few inches first, looking through the gap. The hallway was empty, the bright white light reflected on the rubber floor, and there was no sound except the faint hum of the equipment. I stepped out of the locker room with my heart still racing and immediately looked toward the main workout area. The man was no longer near the machines. I walked slowly toward the automated reception area, pretending to check my phone while scanning the room with my eyes. He was nowhere visible. I went to the glass exit door and looked at the parking lot. The car I had seen when I arrived was no longer there. The only vehicle left was mine. A clear chill settled in my stomach. He had left too quickly. I hadn't heard an engine start while I was in the locker room, but maybe the echo in the hallway had muffled it. Before leaving, I decided I would speak to management the next day and ask for access to the security cameras. I didn't want to leave it as maybe it was a mistake. The next day, I returned to the gym in the early afternoon and asked to speak to the manager. I explained exactly what had happened without exaggerating, just stating the facts. The man watching my workout, the door that didn't lock properly, the handle turning while I was changing. He took it seriously immediately and said he could review the cameras from the previous night. We sat in the small monitoring room watching the recording from the hallway leading to the women's locker room. In the footage, you could clearly see the man walking down the hallway a few minutes after I entered. He stopped outside the locker room door. He didn't enter right away. He just stood there. He stood there for almost 3 full minutes, without checking his phone, without looking around, just standing facing the door. After that, the recording showed him slowly turning the handle. It wasn't a quick test. He turned it, released it, and turned it again, exactly as I had felt from the other side. When he heard movement inside, probably when I pressed my body against the door, he stood still for a few seconds and then walked away calmly toward the exit. The manager said he had never received a similar complaint about him before, but that the behavior was clearly unacceptable. He told me the man had a monthly pass and that they would immediately cancel his access. I never saw him there again. The locker room door was fixed the following week. What stayed with me wasn't just the attempt to enter. It was the fact that he stood there for almost 3 minutes before trying. As if he were waiting for the right moment. As if he had been studying my schedule and my patterns in that space. To this day, whenever I enter an empty locker room at night, I always check the lock more than once before stepping away from the door. Story 3. I was 27 years old when I moved into an apartment in Nashville, Tennessee, near the hospital where I worked as a nurse. I worked night shifts 3 times a week, usually leaving after 6 a.m., when the sky was still somewhat dark. The building where I lived had an open parking lot in the back with no gate, just a few cameras mounted on poles. I always parked in the same spot, near the side staircase, because it was closer to the entrance of my building. My routine was practically timed. I arrived at the same hours, left on the same days, and rarely changed my route. The first note appeared on a Thursday morning after an especially exhausting shift. My head felt heavy, and all I wanted was to sleep when I saw a piece of paper tucked under my windshield wiper. At first I thought it was an advertisement or some notice from the condominium, but when I picked up the paper and read it, I felt a chill in my stomach. It was handwritten in blue ink. "You forgot to lock it yesterday." That was it, no signature, no direct threat. I stood there for a few seconds trying to understand. I was certain I had locked the car. I always checked twice before going up to my apartment. I got inside and immediately checked the doors. All of them were locked. There were no signs of forced entry, no items out of place, nothing disturbed on the dashboard. My first impulse was to think someone was playing a bad joke, maybe a neighbor trying to be funny. But no one in the building knew me well enough to recognize which car was mine in the first week. I had moved in less than 10 days earlier. I put the note in my bag, still trying to convince myself it could be random. I spent the entire day thinking about the sentence, repeating it in my mind. "You forgot to lock it yesterday." It wasn't a threat, but it wasn't innocent either. The following week on Wednesday, I worked another night shift. I left the hospital around 6:15 a.m., exhausted as usual. I drove to my building almost on autopilot. When I parked in my usual spot and turned off the engine, I felt a tightness in my chest even before looking at the windshield. There was another piece of paper. I stood still for a few seconds before picking it up, as if I already knew I wouldn't like what it said. When I finally removed it, I read, "I like your Wednesday shift." My vision seemed to narrow in that moment. My Wednesday shift always started at 7 p.m. and ended at dawn. That meant someone was observing not only my car, but my schedule. I sat inside the car for several minutes holding the note. My heart was racing in a way that wasn't just exhaustion. The sentence was too specific to be a coincidence. "I like your Wednesday shift." That meant the person knew exactly which nights I worked. I hadn't discussed my schedule with anyone in the building. My routine was simply leaving at the beginning of the evening and returning at dawn. I began thinking about all the times I had walked alone from the parking lot to the side staircase, looking at my phone or too distracted to notice if anyone was nearby. I went up to my apartment with the feeling that I was being watched. I locked the door and went straight to the window that overlooked the parking lot. My car was there, normal as always. No one visible walking around at that moment. The lot was open, so anyone could enter and leave without being noticed. I started wondering how long someone might have been noticing my schedule. If the notes were just the beginning or if this had been happening before I realized. I spent the day waking up several times, imagining noises in the hallway. The next day, I brought the 2 notes to the building manager. He seemed more bothered by the idea of having to deal with it than truly concerned. He said that technically, there was no crime. No one had damaged my car. No one had tried to enter my apartment, just notes. He promised to review the parking lot cameras, but made it clear that without a break-in or an explicit threat, it would be difficult to take formal action. That left me feeling helpless. It was as if I had to wait for something worse to happen to be taken seriously. 2 days later, he called me to review the footage from early Wednesday morning. We sat in front of a small monitor in the management office. The video showed the parking lot nearly empty, with dim lighting. Around 5:10 a.m., a car slowly entered and parked in a spot farther away but with a direct view of my usual space. The car remained there with the engine off. No one got out. It stayed parked for more than an hour. At 6:12 a.m., when my car appeared on camera, the other vehicle was still there. In the footage, you could see my car entering my usual spot. I stepped out and walked toward the side staircase, unaware of anything unusual. The other car remained parked. The camera angle didn't clearly show the driver's face. The windshield reflected the light from a pole, and the person inside seemed slightly reclined, almost out of direct view. After I went upstairs, the car stayed for a few more minutes. Then it started and drove away slowly without haste. There was no visible physical approach in the footage, which made the manager even more indifferent. He said that since there was no direct contact and no recorded attempt to break in, there wasn't much to do besides stay alert. That made me even more uneasy. Whoever it was had waited for more than an hour before I arrived. That wasn't random. It was someone studying my schedule with precision. They knew exactly when I would show up. It wasn't coincidence, it wasn't random, it was routine analyzed. I started mentally reviewing all my fixed weekly schedules. The following Wednesday, I finished my shift with my heart already racing before I even left the hospital. I tried to act normal, but every part of my routine felt exposed. When I reached my building's parking lot, I slowed down before entering. I looked around, trying to identify any car parked that wasn't usually there. There were 2 vehicles I recognized from neighbors, but there was also a dark sedan parked farther away near the exit. The tension returned immediately. I parked in my usual spot and turned off the engine. I sat there for a few seconds, watching through the rearview mirror. The dark sedan was parked with its headlights off. I couldn't see who was inside. I decided not to get out immediately. I waited nearly 2 minutes. The car didn't move. My breathing was shallow. I was trying to decide whether to go upstairs or drive around the block again. That's when I noticed something even more disturbing. The sedan was positioned at the exact angle that allowed a direct view of the side staircase door I always used. I remained inside my car for several more minutes, pretending to scroll on my phone while watching from the corner of my eye. The sedan didn't move. No interior light was on, just the dark silhouette of the vehicle sitting there. I felt a mix of fear and anger. Nothing illegal was happening at that moment, but the feeling of being monitored was unmistakable. Instead of using the side staircase, I decided to drive to the front of the building and temporarily park near the main entrance, where there was more lighting and more visible cameras. I got out and walked to the main door, hearing my footsteps echo on the concrete. I glanced back discreetly. The sedan had not followed me. It remained in the same spot. I entered the building and went straight to the second-floor hallway window that partially overlooked the parking lot. From there, I could see the sedan from another angle. It was still there. About 5 minutes later, when no one else entered or exited, the car started and slowly left the parking lot. No horn, no rush. It just left. The next morning, I returned to the office and asked again to review the cameras. The manager showed me the footage from the previous night. The same pattern repeated. The sedan entered the parking lot about an hour before my usual arrival time, remained parked with a direct view of my space, and left a few minutes after I entered the building. The driver's face was never visible due to the windshield reflection and the camera angle. Technically, he was doing nothing but parking and waiting. That's when I understood it wasn't just about the notes. Someone was studying my routine with meticulous precision. They knew exactly which nights I worked. They knew where I parked. They knew approximately what time I arrived. The manager kept repeating that no crime had been committed, but for me, something was already deeply wrong. I changed my parking spot, altered my schedule whenever possible, and started varying the building entrance I used. I never received another note, but the feeling that someone observed my routine long enough to know every detail still follows me. I never found out who was inside that car, and maybe that's what unsettles me the most. Story 4. I was 19 years old when this happened, and I was in my first year of college in Boston studying at a university near downtown. I lived in a student building about a 15-minute walk from campus and used to spend much of my day between classes in a small cafe on the corner of the main street. It was a quiet place frequented by students and a few older neighborhood residents. I always sat near the window with my laptop open, reviewing notes or reading. That's where I started noticing an older man who seemed to be there almost every day at the same time as me. He looked to be in his mid-40s, always wearing a dark coat and with a different book on the table. At first, our interactions were normal. He would comment on the weather, ask in a generic way what I was studying. I answered politely without giving many details. I didn't find it strange because the cafe had a somewhat communal atmosphere. Over time, he began showing up on the same days and at the same times as me. Still, I didn't pay much attention, until the day he mentioned something that made my stomach drop instantly. That afternoon, I was reviewing my cellular biology notes when he approached my table and casually remarked that Wednesday is the toughest day for anyone who has lab in the science building at 8 in the morning. I looked up immediately. I really did have lab at 8 on Wednesdays in the science building. I had never mentioned that to him. In fact, I had barely said what my major was. I responded vaguely and asked how he knew. He gave a short smile and said he could tell by the type of book I carried and the times I appeared at the cafe. That could have been intelligent observation, but the way he said it didn't sound like deduction. It sounded like confirmed information. He continued, saying that living in that red building behind the subway station must be convenient for someone with early classes. My entire body tensed. I really did live in a red building near the station. I had never mentioned my address or which building I lived in. I started wondering if he had followed me before. I said I had to go and close my laptop faster than usual. I left the cafe trying to stay calm. I didn't want to look frightened, but my head was spinning. I began walking toward the subway station, as I usually did after afternoon classes. As I walked, I had the clear feeling that someone was behind me. I didn't look immediately. I tried to act normal for a few steps. Then, as I passed a storefront window reflecting the sidewalk, I saw his reflection a few steps behind me. He wasn't right next to me, but he was heading in the same direction, maintaining a constant distance. My heart started beating faster. I decided to test it. Instead of going straight to the main subway entrance, I turned left onto a smaller street that I normally didn't use. I rarely changed my route, so that change was intentional. I kept walking without looking back. After a few seconds, I heard footsteps adjusting their pace behind me. I looked at the reflection in another shop window, and there he was again, now on the same alternate street. That confirmed what I had feared. My stomach tightened in a way that wasn't just nervousness. I knew he wasn't heading the same way by coincidence. I slowed down slightly, pretending to look at my phone, and he slowed down too. I picked up my pace and he adjusted his almost immediately. I didn't want to run because that might escalate the situation, so I kept walking steadily until I returned to the main street leading to the subway. The station entrance was visible ahead, with a few people going down the stairs. That gave me some relief. I entered the station without looking directly behind me. I passed through the gate and went down the escalators, trying to blend in with the flow of passengers. When I reached the platform, there were quite a few people waiting. I positioned myself near a larger group, almost pressed next to a woman with a big backpack. My heart was still racing. A few seconds later, I saw him come down the stairs too. He didn't seem rushed. He walked to the platform and stood a few meters away from me, looking at the tracks but slightly tilting his head in my direction. The train arrived with its characteristic loud noise and the doors opened. I quickly entered one of the more crowded cars, squeezing between passengers. I was practically pressed against other people, gripping the metal pole with my sweating hand. I didn't want to look directly at him, but in my peripheral vision I could see that he had entered the same car a few doors behind. My heart was pounding so hard I felt pressure in my throat. I tried to blend in as much as possible, shifting positions when the car swayed, always staying behind someone taller. When the train began moving, I took advantage of the first stop and moved to another car through the internal connection, still crowded. I don't know if he noticed. I just knew I needed to break the line of sight. I stayed in that second car until I reached my station. When the doors opened, I waited for a few people to get off first and then stepped out quickly. I didn't look back until I climbed the stairs to the street. Only when I was almost at the exit did I dare to turn my head. I didn't see him there at that moment, but I didn't feel complete relief. In the following days, I avoided the cafe entirely. I started studying in the campus library and changed my schedule whenever I could. I wanted to believe it had been an isolated episode, maybe a coincidence I had interpreted as threatening out of nervousness. But the feeling of being watched didn't disappear. I found myself checking reflections in windows, looking behind me more often than before. Every older man in a dark coat seemed suspicious. A week after the subway incident, I was in the library reviewing material for an exam. I had left my backpack on my chair while I went to the shelves to grab a reference book. When I returned to my table, there was a different book on it. It wasn't mine. It was a common novel, the kind you can easily find in bookstores. I looked around, thinking someone had left it by mistake. The library was fairly full, but no one seemed to be paying attention to me. When I opened the cover of the book, my hands turned cold. On the first page, handwritten, was my full name. The handwriting was simple, written in black pen. There was no message, no explicit threat, just my full name written at the top of the first page. I stared at it for several seconds, trying to process it. I had never checked out library books with my name written by hand. I hadn't told that man at the cafe my full name beyond my first name. And yet there it was, written clearly. I felt the same tightness in my chest that I had felt when he mentioned my building. It was the same sensation of someone knowing more than they should. I looked around the library, trying to identify if he was there. I didn't see anyone I immediately recognized. The environment was normal. People typing, pages turning, the low hum of the air conditioning. But in that moment, I had an unsettling certainty. He didn't need to follow me openly anymore. He already knew my schedule, my route, where I studied, and where I lived. The book was a way of showing that. I never returned to that cafe and requested a dorm change a few weeks later. To this day, I don't know how long he had been observing my routine before he started talking to me. And that uncertainty is what disturbs me the most. Story 5. I was 28 years old when this happened, and I was living alone in a mid-sized residential building in Denver, Colorado. It was a relatively modern building, with a secured lobby and an elevator system that required a key card after 10 p.m. to access the upper floors. I worked at a veterinary clinic, and on some nights during the week I left after 10:30 p.m. I liked the building precisely because of that access control, since it gave me a sense of security. The lobby was small, with light marble flooring, 2 chairs near the wall, and a camera positioned above the main entrance. I usually arrived tired, thinking only about going upstairs and sleeping. That night I arrived around 11:40 p.m. The air was cold and dry, typical of Colorado at night. I entered the building using my card and noticed a man standing near the elevator. He was leaning against the side wall, hands in his pockets, looking at the digital panel that showed the floors. He didn't look like any resident I recognized. He appeared to be in his early 30s, wearing a dark jacket and a cap. At first I thought he was waiting for someone to come down. The lobby was too quiet, and the echo of my footsteps on the marble made the situation feel strangely tense. I walked toward the elevator, trying to act normal. He didn't say anything as I passed him, but I clearly felt his eyes following my movements. I placed my key card on the reader next to the panel. The green light turned on and the elevator was unlocked so I could select my floor. At that moment, I noticed something strange. He didn't have a card in his hand. He wasn't trying to access the panel. He was just standing there. I quickly pressed the button for my floor, trying to remain calm. The elevator began to descend to pick me up from the ground level. As soon as the doors opened, I stepped inside and turned toward the panel. That's when I heard quick footsteps behind me. Before I could react, he moved toward the elevator doors as if he had decided to enter at the last second. He hadn't used any card. He had been waiting for someone else to unlock access. I felt panic rise immediately. I placed my hand on the edge of the door and pressed the close button repeatedly. He extended his leg to try to stop it from closing, but I managed to press hard enough for the doors to slide shut before he could fully get inside. The doors closed just inches from his shoulder. I saw his expression for a second before the elevator began to rise. It wasn't surprise, it wasn't anger. It was something colder, like calculation. My heart was racing as the elevator went up. My hands were shaking so badly I had to lean against the handrail. I knew he didn't have a card, so he couldn't use the elevator alone to come up. But that didn't mean he would leave immediately. When the doors opened on my floor, I stepped out quickly and walked toward my apartment, almost running. I went inside, locked the door, and leaned my body against it for a few seconds, trying to steady my breathing. I stood there in complete silence, listening for any sound coming from the hallway. Nothing. No footsteps, no elevator arriving. After a few minutes, I went to the living room window that faced the street and tried to convince myself he had probably left. I knew the system required a card to go up after 10 p.m., so technically, he was stuck in the lobby. Even so, the feeling that it wasn't over wouldn't leave my mind. It took me almost an hour to relax enough to lie down. I stayed on my phone in bed, trying to distract myself. The building was silent, as it usually was after midnight. At 2:17 a.m., my apartment intercom rang. The sound echoed far too loudly in the silence of the bedroom. My heart jumped into my throat. No one ever used the intercom at that hour. I stood there staring at the device on the wall, waiting for it to stop on its own. It rang again. I didn't want to answer, but I also wanted to understand what was happening. I carefully went to the living room and pressed the button to listen without unlocking the door. Before I could say anything, I heard faint breathing on the other end. It wasn't line interference. It was someone breathing close to the microphone. Then a male voice, almost whispering, said, "I know which floor is yours." My hand went cold instantly. The voice didn't sound agitated, it sounded close, controlled. I immediately hung up without responding. My whole body was rigid. I stood in the middle of the living room, trying to hear any movement in the hallway on my floor. I didn't hear footsteps or the elevator arriving. If he had been on my floor, I would have heard it. That meant he was still in the lobby. And yet he knew which floor was mine. It didn't make immediate sense. I began thinking about how he might have seen which button I pressed on the elevator panel before the doors closed. I went to the door and looked through the peephole, even knowing he couldn't be there without a card. The hallway was empty and normally lit. I returned to the couch and called the building's emergency administration line, quickly explaining what had happened. The attendant said he would check the lobby cameras. While I waited for a call back, I stared at my phone screen, feeling the silence in the apartment grow unbearably heavy. Every sound from the heating system made me jump. About 15 minutes later, the night concierge returned my call. His voice was more serious than before. He said he had reviewed the lobby cameras and confirmed that the man had not left the building immediately after I went upstairs. In fact, he had remained in the lobby for more than 40 minutes. He walked back and forth, sometimes leaning near the elevator, sometimes sitting in one of the chairs. He did not try to use the intercom for any other apartment. He didn't call any specific unit through the system. He simply waited. The concierge also said that shortly before the intercom rang in my apartment, the man approached the main panel and appeared to observe the list of illuminated floors. The system discreetly showed which floor was in use right after a card unlocked access. It was a detail I had never noticed. If he had been paying attention when I pressed the button, he would have seen the number light up for a few seconds. That meant he didn't need to know my name or my apartment number. He just needed to know which floor I had selected. I felt a weight in my chest when I realized how simple it was. The concierge said that after using the intercom, the man left the building a few minutes later, walking normally out the main door. He didn't run, didn't appear nervous. He simply left. The exterior camera didn't capture his face clearly because of the cap and the dim street lighting. I asked them to save the footage and inform the administration the next day. He agreed, but emphasized that technically the man had not committed any crime inside the building. That gave me the same feeling of vulnerability I had experienced before in other situations. It wasn't necessary to break a rule to cross a boundary. I couldn't sleep that night. I kept imagining what would have happened if I hadn't managed to close the elevator doors in time. He would have come up with me. I would have been trapped in a confined space for several floors. The thought made me break into a cold sweat again, even while lying down. The next morning, I spoke with management and requested that they review the nighttime access protocol. They said they would increase concierge presence after 10 p.m. and adjust the elevator panel visibility so it wouldn't show the unlocked floor. I never saw that man in the building again, but for weeks I felt that anyone standing in the lobby might be waiting for someone distracted enough to use their card. What marked me the most wasn't just the whisper on the intercom. It was knowing that he stayed there for more than 40 minutes waiting, watching without ever calling another apartment. He wasn't looking for just anyone. He was waiting for me. Story 6. I am 31 years old and I live in Columbia, South Carolina. That night I was driving back from my parents' house, who live in a small town about an hour and a half away. I had spent the weekend with them because my mom wasn't feeling well. Nothing serious, just the kind of thing that makes you want to stay close. I left their house around 9:40 p.m. It was completely dark already. That kind of rural highway darkness where only what your headlights touch seems to exist. Most of the drive is along a state highway with very few streetlights, thick woods on both sides, and almost no traffic after 9 at night. I had driven that route dozens of times. I had never truly felt unsafe there. It was just a quiet road. The first 20 minutes were normal. I had the radio on low, trying to stay awake because it had been a long day. The air was humid and my windshield started fogging slightly from the inside, so I turned the air conditioning up higher. At some point, glancing in the rearview mirror, I noticed headlights appearing behind me. I didn't think much of it at first. It's a single highway. Eventually, someone always shows up. The car kept a reasonable distance, not tailgating, not too far back either. But after a few minutes, I started to notice that the distance wasn't changing. I wasn't exactly timing it, but it felt too long for a car not to pass, considering the road was completely empty. After a few minutes, I decided to slow down slightly, more out of curiosity than fear. I had been going about 55 miles per hour, so I eased off the gas until I dropped to 45. Normally, on an empty highway, when you do that, the car behind you passes or at least closes in, but this one didn't. It simply slowed down too. The distance between us remained almost exactly the same. There was no slight approach, no attempt to pass. It was as if it was adjusting precisely to my speed. I felt a strange discomfort in my chest, but tried to convince myself it could be coincidence. Maybe the driver was just cautious, maybe distracted. Still, I kept checking the rearview mirror every few seconds, trying to make out the model of the car. All I could see were 2 white headlights and a dark silhouette. I decided to speed up again, going back to 60 miles per hour. The road was straight in that stretch, and I could see far ahead. There were no cars coming in the opposite direction. I thought if the person was in a hurry, they'd pass there. But the same pattern happened. They sped up too, not aggressively, just enough to maintain the same distance. This had gone on too long. I looked at the dashboard clock and realized it had been more than 20 minutes since I first noticed those headlights. 20 minutes is more than enough time for any car to pass on a completely empty highway. My mouth started to feel dry. I turned off the radio because the sound was irritating me. I wanted to hear anything different, any change in the engine noise behind me. That's when I began noticing details I would normally ignore. The car never got close enough for me to clearly see the license plate, but it also never fell too far back. It was like it was measuring the exact same amount of space the entire time. I tested it again, slowing down more noticeably, almost as if I were about to pull over onto the shoulder. My heart was racing by then. The car behind me did the exact same thing. Slowed down, maintaining the distance. No horn, no attempt to pass. Just that silent adjustment. The highway was so empty that I could hear only the steady hum of my own engine, and, faintly behind me, the soft echo of the car trailing me. It felt less like being followed and more like being studied. I started thinking about turning onto a side road just to test it once and for all. There was a curve ahead that led to a secondary road, less traveled. I didn't signal. I simply slowed slightly before the curve and turned suddenly. My tires made a faint squeal on the asphalt because I turned faster than usual. For a second, I thought the car would continue straight, But when I checked the rearview mirror, the headlights turned too. There was no hesitation, no delay. It was too immediate. That erased any doubt of coincidence. My hands felt cold on the steering wheel. My entire body went into a state of alert I had never experienced while driving before. I knew I needed to get somewhere lit and populated. A few miles after that turn, I remembered a 24-hour gas station at an intersection before the next town. It wasn't fancy, but there was always at least one employee inside and bright lights over the pumps. I started heading toward it, trying to appear as normal as possible, though my foot pressed harder on the accelerator without me realizing. The car behind me stayed there, keeping the exact same space. I could see the headlights reflecting in my side mirror. No attempt to close in, no attempt to pass, just that constant presence. When the illuminated gas station sign appeared ahead, I felt immediate relief. I signaled and pulled into the brightly lit lot. I slowed and stopped near the convenience store entrance where the lights were strongest. My heart was pounding so hard I could feel it in my throat. I waited to see if the car would pull in too. It didn't. It drove slowly past the gas station entrance, almost as if evaluating, and continued down the road. I managed to glimpse a dark sedan, maybe black or very dark blue, but I couldn't make out the make or model. The plate was briefly illuminated by my headlights, but I couldn't read the numbers. I sat there for nearly 2 minutes, breathing deeply, trying to decide if I was overreacting. Maybe the driver had simply been heading the same direction as me. Maybe it was all coincidence. I almost convinced myself of that. I got out of the car anyway, more to calm down than to refuel. I went inside and bought a bottle of water just to have a reason to stay a few minutes. The air conditioning was too strong, and I noticed how cold my hands were when I held the bottle. The clerk looked bored, scrolling on his phone behind the counter. I almost told him I thought someone had been following me, but I felt silly before I could even open my mouth. Outside, the highway remained empty. No sign of the dark sedan. I waited about 5 minutes, watching through the store window. Nothing. I started to think maybe I really had let anxiety take over. I paid for the water, took a deep breath, and returned to my car. When I left the station and turned back onto the main road, I automatically checked the rearview mirror. The road looked empty for a few seconds. I felt a small wave of relief, like the episode had ended there. But less than a minute later, 2 headlights appeared around the curve behind me. Same height, same intensity, same initial distance. My stomach dropped instantly. There was no sudden acceleration, no aggressive approach. Just that presence returning exactly to where it had been before. It was as if the car had slowed down after passing the station and waited for me to come back out. The consistency was what terrified me most. It didn't feel like someone unsure. It felt calculated. At that moment, I stopped trying to rationalize. It wasn't coincidence. It wasn't paranoia. I could feel that clearly in my body. My hands were gripping the wheel too tightly, my shoulders locked. I started thinking quickly about what to do. The next town was about 15 minutes away. I knew there was a police station right at the entrance near the courthouse. I had never gone inside, but I remembered the building because it was well lit at night. I decided I would not go home. I didn't want to lead that car to my address. I kept my speed steady, trying not to show that I had noticed anything. The car behind me continued at the same pace. No passing, no change in pattern. Just that exact distance that had lasted far too long to be normal. When the first city lights appeared ahead, I felt both relief and fear. If the person had bad intentions, that would be the moment to give up. But the headlights remained. I made the turn toward downtown without signaling in advance, just slowing and turning abruptly. The car did the same. No delay, no hesitation. That's when I turned directly into the police station parking lot. I didn't stop on the street. I drove straight into the brightly lit area in front of the building where patrol cars were parked. My heart was pounding harder than I'd ever felt before. I stopped the car near the entrance line and looked in the rearview mirror, expecting the sedan to pull in behind me. It didn't. It slowed as it approached the station, as if assessing the situation, then continued down the main road. It didn't speed off dramatically. It didn't do anything immediately suspicious. It just kept driving, too slowly for someone who was simply following traffic. I tried to read the plate one last time as it passed under the streetlight in front of the building. I saw a few numbers, maybe an 8 or a 3, but I couldn't piece together the full sequence. It was as if my mind couldn't lock in the information. I sat there for a few seconds, breathing heavily, trying to memorize any detail I could recall. I turned off the car and went into the station, my legs still slightly shaky. There was an officer behind the desk, and I quickly explained what had happened, trying to sound coherent. As I spoke, I started doubting myself again. It was hard to explain that someone was following me without them doing something openly illegal. The officer came outside with me and looked at the street. There were no dark sedans passing at that moment. He took down the description I could give, but without a full plate or exact model, there wasn't much to do right then. He said I had done the right thing by driving straight there. I sat in my car for a few minutes afterward, my hands still trembling slightly. I didn't head home until I was certain there was no car behind me leaving town. Even then, I checked the rearview mirror every few seconds for the rest of the drive. I got home almost an hour later than I should have, with the feeling that someone had tested my limits on that road. To this day, when I drive that rural stretch at night, any headlights that appear behind me make my body react before my mind does. I never saw that specific sedan again, at least not that I noticed. But what unsettles me most is not knowing whether it was someone randomly choosing a car to follow, or if it was specifically mine. The plate was never clear enough for me to be certain, and that lack of certainty is what still leaves me uneasy. Story 7. I am 22 years old and I live alone in an apartment complex in Tempe, Arizona. I moved there at the beginning of last semester because it was close to the university and relatively safe. At least, that's what everyone said. The complex is gated, with an electronic gate for cars and a separate pedestrian entrance that requires a key fob. Most of the residents are students or young professionals. I've always liked having a well-organized routine, especially living alone for the first time. Every morning I woke up at 6 a.m., I put on a light sweatshirt because of the dry early morning air, and went running at the same park about a 10-minute walk away. It was a simple park, with a dirt trail, a few scattered benches and trees that provided enough shade to keep the heat from being unbearable early on. The first time I noticed the man, I didn't think much of it. He was sitting on one of the benches near the main curve of the trail. He looked to be in his 40s or 50s, hard to tell exactly. He always wore simple clothes, a neutral t-shirt and jeans. He wasn't dressed for running. He didn't seem to be waiting for anyone either. He just sat there, arms resting on his legs, staring straight ahead. When I ran past him, I felt his eyes follow me, but that happens sometimes in parks. I ignored it. The next day, he was on the same bench, same posture, same spot. Again, I didn't take it as a warning. I figured maybe he lived nearby and came there every morning. But I started noticing he never checked his phone, never read anything, never seemed occupied. He just watched. On the third morning in a row, I was paying attention on purpose. I slowed down slightly as I approached the bench, pretending to adjust my watch so I could look more closely. He was in exactly the same position, sitting more on the right side of the bench, leaving the left side empty. There was no water bottle next to him, no backpack, nothing to suggest he had been there long or had just arrived. When I passed him, I clearly felt him turn his head to follow my movement. It wasn't quick, it was slow and continuous. My stomach tightened, but I tried to rationalize it again. Maybe he was just distracted. Maybe he was waiting for someone and I was projecting something that wasn't there. Still, that morning I finished my run faster than usual. In the following days, he continued to be there. Always on the same bench, always in the same posture. What began to bother me wasn't just his presence, but the consistency. I ran on different days, sometimes 5 minutes earlier, sometimes 10 minutes later. He was always there when I passed that curve. I never saw him arrive. I never saw him leave. I never saw him interact with anyone, and it wasn't an empty park. Other people walked, elderly residents strolled their dogs, mothers pushed strollers, but he never seemed to pay attention to anyone else. It was always that fixed stare that when I passed seemed to follow me until I disappeared down the trail. I started feeling a strange heat in my face every time I approached that spot, as if my body was already anticipating something. One Friday, I decided to test whether it was just coincidence in my head. Instead of leaving at 6 a.m. like always, I waited until almost 7:15. It was brighter by then, the park more crowded and the heat beginning to rise quickly like it does in Arizona. I thought that if he truly had a fixed routine, maybe he'd already be gone at that hour. As I walked to the park, My heart was beating faster than it should have for someone who hadn't even started running yet. I turned onto the main trail trying to look casual, but I was already scanning for the bench before I reached the curve. He was there, same bench, same posture. Right side occupied, left side empty. I felt such a clear discomfort that I had to slow down to breathe properly. It wasn't just a feeling anymore, it was a pattern. That morning I couldn't complete the full route. I turned back earlier than usual and went home sooner. For the rest of the day I kept thinking about it. Maybe he lived nearby and was there all day. Maybe I was just noticing because I'd been alone too much lately. I tried talking about it with a classmate, but as I explained it, I started to feel like I was exaggerating. He hadn't spoken to me. He hadn't made any gestures. He was just sitting there. Still, there was something wrong with the way he looked. It wasn't a vacant stare, it was too attentive. The next day, instead of running in the morning, I decided to change everything. I went in the middle of the afternoon, after classes, around 3:30 p.m., a time I had never gone before. That afternoon, the heat was intense. That dry heat that feels like it's pressing the air against your face. The park was nearly empty compared to the mornings. A few people walking slowly. 2 teenagers playing basketball at a distant court. I kept telling myself it was just a test, that I was being rational. If he was only there in the mornings, that would prove it was coincidence. I entered the trail and started running at a slower pace because of the sun. Even before reaching the curve, I felt that tension in my body again, as if I already knew what I would see. When I turned the corner, the bench came into view ahead. And he was there. Same position, same side of the bench, same slight forward lean. It didn't make sense. I had never seen him there at that time. Never. I had run there dozens of times and had never gone in the afternoon. And yet he was there exactly as he was in the mornings. This time I couldn't keep my pace. My body felt heavy and I passed him almost walking. When I glanced sideways, he was already looking directly at me, as if he knew I had changed my schedule on purpose. There was no surprise on his face, no reaction, just that steady, fixed gaze. A chill ran up my spine despite the extreme heat. It was the first time I truly felt afraid. I didn't finish my run. I turned around right after the curve and left the trail quickly, trying not to look desperate. I could feel his eyes on my back even without turning to confirm. My heart was racing in a strange way, not from physical effort, but from the sense that something wasn't right. As I crossed the park's parking lot, I thought about looking back just to make sure he was still on the bench. But I didn't. Part of me was afraid he wouldn't be, that he'd be standing, or walking toward me. I went straight to the sidewalk and walked quickly back to my apartment complex, trying to act like nothing was happening. When I got close to my complex, calmer for being in a familiar area, something immediately caught my attention. The electronic gate to the parking lot was slightly open. Not completely wide open, but not in its normal position either. Usually it closes fully after a car enters, locking with a clear metallic click. I was used to that sound every time I came home. At that moment, it was sitting a few inches open, as if it had been forced or interrupted while closing. I stood on the sidewalk for a few seconds staring at it. To enter by car, you needed a residence remote. It wasn't something just anyone could access. A cold feeling settled in my stomach that had nothing to do with the dry afternoon air. I stood there too long, trying to decide if it could be a simple mechanical issue. Maybe someone had just driven through and the sensor had malfunctioned. Maybe the heat had affected the system. I was searching for any simple explanation that didn't involve what was starting to form in my mind. I pushed the gate lightly with my hand and it gave way a little more without resistance. It shouldn't have done that. Normally it feels heavy, like it's locked into the track. The parking lot was silent. A few cars in their usual spots, nothing visibly out of place. Still, the feeling that something had been altered even slightly was too strong to ignore. I stepped inside, and the gate closed behind me with the familiar metallic click. The sound echoed louder than usual in my ears. I walked up the stairs to my building, looking around, trying to act natural while watching for any movement. No one was in the hallway. When I reached my apartment door, my hands were sweating again. I unlocked it, went inside quickly, and shut it behind me. The first thing I did was check the internal lock and the top latch. They were in place. I walked through the entire apartment. Bedroom, bathroom, kitchen. Nothing seemed disturbed. But the feeling of intrusion didn't come from something visibly moved. It came from the possibility that someone might know when I leave, when I return, and exactly where I go. I couldn't stop thinking about the coincidence between changing my running time and finding him there anyway. He had never been there in the afternoon before, at least not when I ran in the mornings. And on the only day I completely changed my routine, he was on the same bench as if he had anticipated it. The slightly open gate only reinforced the idea that maybe someone was watching more than just my workouts at the park. I never confronted that man. I never spoke to him. In the following days, I stopped running at that park and started driving to a more distant one. I also asked the complex management to check the gate system. They said it could have just been a technical malfunction. Maybe it was. But to this day, whenever I see someone sitting on a bench staring fixedly at a trail, my body reacts before logic can catch up. I've never been able to ignore that kind of look again.
I'm really grateful for staying until the last minute. It's always good to know that you're here, listening to every detail. If you liked it, comment which part was the scariest for you. And of course, sign up to keep listening to stories as dark as this one. See you in the next video.